I still hear the river before I sleep. Not the gentle hiss of water on stone, but a low, pulsing rush that feels like a heartbeat buried deep in the earth. It waits behind my eyelids, that sound, ready to drag me back to the night, everything cracked open. I wish I could tell you it was only a nightmare, that it faded with morning light. But the air in my room still tastes of cold iron, and sometimes I wake to wet footprints leading nowhere. It began with a dare, though you probably guessed that. Blackwater River at midnight, the kind of legend every small town whispers about, but never proves. People say the current moves against the moon, that it keeps what it takes. My friend and I laughed at those stories earlier that evening, clinking bottles under street lamps that hummed like dying bees. We were loud, careless, alive. I didn't know it was the last time I'd feel any of that. By the time we reached the bank, the world had gone too quiet. No frogs, no wind. Even our footsteps on the gravel seemed to sink without an echo. Mist coiled off the water, thick and silver like something breathing. I remember a smell, metallic, sharp, as if the river itself had opened a vein. My phone screen flickered in my pocket, though I hadn't touched it. He stood closer to the edge than I dared, grinning back at me. "See? Just a story," he said. His voice carried wrong, thin and distant, as if the night were stretching it. Then the water stirred, not a ripple or wave, more like the surface flexed, a living thing testing the air. A shape moved beneath the black glass, brighter than moonlight and darker than anything I'd ever seen. I shouted for him to step back. He didn't. His grin faded into something slack, eyes wide and unfocused, reflecting the impossible shimmer below. I reached for his arm just as the current, or whatever it was, rose without a splash and swallowed him whole. One moment he was there. The next, the bank was empty, the river flat and silent, as if he had never existed. If you're smart, you'll stop listening now. Because what I'm telling you isn't just a memory. The river keeps its own time, and it's still moving toward me. For anyone who hears its name. Summer in our town always smelled like cut grass and cheap beer, and that evening was no different. Streetlights buzzed above the cracked sidewalks, throwing halos on a puddles left from an afternoon storm. My best friend, Dylan, balanced on the curb with his arms stretched wide, pretending he was a tightrope artist on tour. He was always like that, half clown, half daredevil, while I trailed a step behind, content to play the audience. We'd spent the evening the way we always did, swapping stories no one would believe, teasing each other about future plans neither of us really had. Dylan wanted to start a podcast about local legends. I joked that he'd run out of material after 2 episodes. He shot back that I'd probably fact-check his ghost stories into oblivion. That was Dylan. His imagination burned bright enough for both of us. The night felt ordinary, almost comfortingly so. Crickets chirped in the weeds near the railroad tracks. The air carried a faint sweetness from someone's backyard barbecue. But the small, strange details started to pile up in quiet ways I only noticed later. First, my phone died at 70%. 1 second, I was scrolling a message thread. The next, the screen went black and refused to wake. Dylan's phone, too, sputtered out, though he swore it had a full charge. We laughed it off, chalking it up to cheap batteries. Then came the wind. It wasn't cold, not exactly, more like a breath held too long. The trees along the river path bent in one direction, while the grass at our feet swayed in another. I felt the hair on my arms lift as if something were passing through us, something invisible but heavy. Dylan grinned like it was a game. "Nature's drunk," he said, spreading his arms wider. We stopped at the all-night diner for fries, the kind of greasy spoon where the waitstaff know everyone's order. Old Mr. Clancy, a fisherman who smelled like brine and cigarettes, shuffled past our booth. He paused just long enough to mutter, "River's restless tonight." His cloudy eyes flicked to Dylan, then to me, before he shuffled out without waiting for a reply. Dylan snorted. "Every town needs its prophet of doom," he whispered. But I watched Clancy's silhouette vanish into the neon haze and felt a prickle under my skin. By the time we left, the sky had gone a darker kind of blue, a shade that felt too heavy for summer. The streets emptied as if on cue, doors shutting like a synchronized heartbeat. Dylan suggested we check out the river. "One quick look for the story," he said. I wanted to say no. I should have. Instead, I followed him into the night, the world around us humming with a silence I still can't explain. The air thickened as we left the diner's neon glow behind. Blackwater Road stretched ahead like a ribbon of tar, the only light a smear of moon filtered through restless clouds. Dylan kicked a pebble into the dark and grinned back at me. "Midnight River Walk," he said, as if it were an official challenge. "Come on, it's the perfect night. Spooky sky, dead phones. Fate wants us to do this." "You mean fate wants us to get eaten by mosquitoes?" I muttered, but my feet kept moving. I'd followed Dylan into worse ideas, and the way he said it, half dare, half promise, was hard to resist. The small town, quiet pressed in, different from the normal calm of after hours. Houses we knew in daylight seemed strange, their windows black mirrors reflecting nothing. A lone dog barked and went silent mid-howl, like someone had cut the sound with a blade. We passed the old gas station with a single bulb over the pump flickered in a slow, almost hypnotic rhythm. Dylan slowed, eyes on the light. "It's like it's winking at us," he said, telling us we're close. "You're reading way too much into a busted bulb." He smirked. "That's my job, skeptic, to see the signs you ignore." By the time we reached the dirt path that wound toward the river, the clouds had sealed the moon completely. Our sneakers crunched on gravel that seemed louder than it should, each step a small betrayal to the silence. Somewhere behind us, a twig snapped. I turned fast, heart hammering, but there was only the empty road. "Relax," Dylan said, though his voice carried a tight edge. "Probably a raccoon, or the ghost of Mr. Clancy come to scold us." I tried to laugh, but it came out thin. The fisherman's warning replayed in my mind. River's restless tonight. The path sloped downward, trees crowding close until their branches knitted overhead. The smell changed first, damp moss and something faintly metallic, like pennies left to rust. I noticed my breath puffing in the air though the night was warm. Dylan stopped at a break in the brush. Beyond it, the river gleamed faintly, a strip of darker black against the shadows. "There it is," he whispered, as though speaking louder might wake it. We stepped onto the bank. The ground was soft, mud slick underfoot. Water slid past without a sound, smooth as oil. Even the crickets had gone silent. Dylan crouched and tossed a small stone. It should have splashed. It didn't. The pebble touched the surface and simply disappeared as if swallowed whole. He looked back at me, eyes wide but alight with excitement. "Okay, that was weird. Science experiment time." "Don't," I said, but he was already searching for another rock. A breeze stirred, cold and sour. The trees creaked in unison, a low groan that vibrated in my chest. Dylan froze, the rock still in his hand. "Did you hear?" he began, but a new sound cut him off, a soft hum, distant yet everywhere, like a voice buried underwater. The hairs on my arms lifted. "Let's go," I whispered. Seriously. He smiled, though his lips trembled. "One more minute. Just one. We came all this way." Behind us, another branch snapped, closer this time. I spun again. The path was empty, but I could swear the darkness itself shifted, a subtle lean toward us. Fine, Dylan said, stepping closer to the water's edge. One picture and we're out. His phone, dead earlier, lit up in his hand with a ghostly glow. The camera opened by itself, lens aimed at the river as if drawn. Okay, he murmured. That's not creepy at all. I reached for his sleeve. Dylan, seriously. But he was already leaning forward, the screen bathing his face in cold light, the hum rising until it felt like the river itself was breathing beneath our feet. The trees opened onto the riverbank like a curtain drawn back to reveal a stage no one should see. Black water spread before us, a strip of glass darker than the night itself. No moonlight touched it. The air smelled sharp, metallic, like a fistful of wet coins, and colder than it had any right to be in midsummer. Dylan took a step forward, sneakers sinking slightly in the mud. "This is perfect," he whispered, as if the river were a sleeping animal we might wake. His voice sounded thin, stretched, as though the darkness was tugging at the edges of each word. I wanted to tell him to stop, to turn back, but the words stuck. Something about the stillness demanded silence. Even the crickets had fallen mute. I could hear my own heartbeat, fast and unsteady, echoing in my ears. He crouched and skimmed a hand along the surface. "It's warm," he said, a surprised laugh slipping out. But the ripple from his touch moved the wrong way, away from the center of the river and toward the bank, like the water was reaching for him. I pulled out my phone to record it, forgetting it had died earlier. The screen blazed a life on its own. The camera app opened without me touching it, framing Dylan in a pale glow. And the preview image, my breath caught. The preview moved a fraction of a second faster than reality. Dylan's arm lifted in the display before he moved in front of me. A glitch, I told myself, though my stomach nodded. The river answered with a low hum, not the rush of current, but a vibration, deep and resonant, threading through my bones. Dylan tilted his head, eyes unfocused. "Do you hear that?" he asked. He sounded almost dreamy, like someone listening to a distant lullaby. "Yeah," I said, barely a whisper. "It's saying something," he murmured. I think it knows my name." Before I could grab him, he stepped closer. The mud sucked at his shoes with a wet sigh. Light bloomed beneath the surface, soft spheres the color of old candle flame, rising in slow spirals. They didn't illuminate the water. Instead, they seemed to drink the darkness, making everything around them blacker. Dylan's pupils widened, swallowing the color of his eyes. "It's beautiful," he said, voice flat, trance-like. "Do you see them? They're calling." The humming deepened, a bass note I felt in my teeth. My phone vibrated violently and then froze on a single frame. Dylan standing ankle-deep, the orbs encircling his legs. But when I looked up, he was still on the bank. I reached for his sleeve. "Dylan, stop. We're leaving. Now." He didn't even blink. "Just a little closer," he breathed. "I need to." The river erupted in a sudden gust of icy wind that stung my skin like sleet. Leaves whipped around us, and the orbs flared brighter, their light a sickly gold. My phone flashed a warning I'd never seen before, tide inbound. The wind died as suddenly as it had risen, leaving the world impossibly still. My ears rang in the silence, a pressure like the pause before an earthquake. Dylan turned his head slightly, his eyes reflecting the strange light. "They want me to come closer," he said, almost tenderly, as though speaking to a lover. "I can hear them. They know everything I've ever." His words snapped off when the water bulged upward. Not a wave, not a splash. Just a rounded swell like something beneath the surface was breathing in. The glow of the orbs merged into a single, pulsing shape that stretched and coiled, too large to belong to any fish. I lunged for his arm. My fingers brushed his jacket sleeve, but it felt slick and cold, like touching ice through cloth. He didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward, one foot then the next, until the river lapped at his ankles. The water welcomed him without a ripple. "Dylan!" My shout cracked the night like a stone through glass. The sound barely carried. It was swallowed by the low hum, now vibrating at a frequency that made my bones ache. The phone in my pocket heated against my leg. I yanked it out. Its screen was awash with static and faint text that flickered between languages I didn't recognize. For a heartbeat, an image formed, Dylan standing waist-deep, mouth open in a silent scream. I looked up. He was still only ankle-deep, but his gaze had gone distant, pupils blown wide. "Please," I begged. "This isn't funny. Get out of there." He finally turned, and for a fleeting second I thought I'd reached him. But his face, it was as though someone had drawn it from memory. Features slightly wrong, edges too smooth. "It's okay," he said, his voice layered with an echo that wasn't his. "You'll understand soon." Before I could move, the river struck. A column of water shot upward, wrapping around his torso like a living rope. Dylan gasped, but didn't fight as it pulled him deeper. I splashed forward, the cold biting so hard it burned. The current shouldn't have been strong. It felt like stepping into syrup. Yet every motion dragged me backward. The glow intensified, and the humming became a chorus. Hundreds of overlapping whispers, each one calling my name. I lunged again, fingertips grazing his shoulder. The instant I touched him, a shock tore through me, a flash of memories that weren't mine. Faces, voices, a rushing sense of endless dark. I ripped my hand back, choking on air that tasted of rust. "Dylan!" I screamed, but the river silenced me with a single, sucking sound. He was gone. No splash, no struggle, just absence. The water lay flat and mirror still, reflecting a sky now perfectly clear. The glowing orbs winked out one by one until only blackness remained. I stood waist-deep, heart battering my ribs, and for a moment I couldn't tell where the river ended and I began. My phone buzzed weakly. On the cracked screen, a final message appeared in stark white letters. "Tide complete. Next cycle pending." The wind returned then, gentle and warm, as if the night were exhaling after a long breath. I stumbled back to the bank, every step heavier than the last. When I turned for one last look, the river seemed utterly ordinary, a quiet stretch of water under a peaceful sky. But the metallic taste clung to my tongue, and the sound of the hum still trembled somewhere behind my heartbeat. I don't remember leaving the river. One moment I was knee-deep in the black water, staring at the place where Dylan had been, and the next I was on the bank, mud drying in streaks across my jeans. My phone lay beside me, dark and silent. A soft mist curled over the surface of black water, like the river was trying to erase itself. I tried calling his name until my voice cracked, but the sound went nowhere. It felt like shouting into a vacuum. No echo, no answering cry, just a faint rustle of leaves and that metallic tang that coated the back of my throat. Panic arrived in waves. First heat, then a hollow cold. I dialed Dylan's number. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Same result. The call timer ticked for half a second, then ended on its own. I stared at the screen until my reflection blurred. My hands were trembling so violently the phone almost slipped. I ran to the narrow dirt road where we'd parked. The car was there, keys still in Dylan's jacket on the passenger seat. Headlights off, doors locked. It looked like we'd never left. For a crazy moment, I wondered if he'd somehow slipped past me, gone home to mess with my head. But his shoes, mud-stained sneakers, were gone. I turned back toward the water. The mist had thickened into a low wall, pale and swirling, hiding everything beyond the first few feet. My footprints along the shore were the only marks in the mud. No second trail. No sign anyone else had been there at all. I told myself to call the police. My thumb hovered over 911, and then my phone lit on its own, screen white as a camera flash. Words flickered across it. 3 words, each appearing one at a time like a heartbeat. Next cycle pending. I dropped the phone as though it had burned me. When I snatched it back, the message was gone, replaced by the home screen and a perfectly normal battery icon. The rational part of me demanded I leave. Drive until sunrise. Pretend none of this had happened. But something in that fog, some quiet gravity, kept me rooted. Dylan was my best friend. I couldn't explain to his mom, or mine, why I'd abandoned him. Headlights appeared down the road. Relief surged. Help. A ranger's truck eased to a stop. The driver's window rolled down to reveal a man in his 50s with a weathered face and eyes too alert for midnight. "You out here alone?" he asked. "My friend. He fell in," I blurted. "He's gone. We have to." The ranger's gaze drifted past me toward the river. "Blackwater," he said softly, almost like a prayer. "You should leave before the tide turns." I blinked. "Please, you don't understand." He cut me off with a slow shake of his head. "Son, I walked this bank for 30 years. Folks go missing here. Every time, the story's the same. They don't come back. Not tonight. Not ever." His words landed with the weight of certainty, like he'd said them many times before. He studied me for a long moment, then added, "If you stay, it might notice you next." Before I could reply, he shifted the truck into gear. "Best forget this place." Then he was gone, taillights swallowed by the trees. I stood there trembling, the night pressing in. My mind kept looping. Dylan was alive. He had to be. Maybe he'd swum across. Maybe he was hiding. Maybe. A sudden splash cut the thought. I spun toward the river. The mist parted in a narrow corridor, just enough to reveal a lone sneaker floating on the surface. Dylan's. The same mud-stained sole I'd seen 100 times. It bobbed once, and then slipped beneath the water without a ripple. I wanted to dive in, to follow, but the memory of that humming, those whispers calling my name, froze me to the spot. My phone buzzed in my pocket again. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. A new notification glowed. Tide complete. Next cycle, 3:33 a.m. The clock on the screen read 3:32. A chill spread through me, slow and deliberate. I backed away, step by step, until the trees swallowed the view of the river. The buzzing in my pocket ceased. When I finally reached the car, the world felt thin, like a paper set about to tear. I started the engine, the sound impossibly loud, and forced myself down the winding road toward town. Each curve of asphalt seemed unfamiliar, as though I'd never driven it before. Only when the first hint of dawn broke behind the pines did I notice the mud on the passenger seat. 2 wet footprints, perfectly outlined, facing forward.